The rain drummed against the windowpane, droplets merging into long streaks as they slid down, mirroring Eleanor Carter's mood. She sat curled up on the windowsill, her gaze fixed on the gray London sky. Not because she enjoyed watching the rain, but simply because she didn't want to face reality. Eleanor Carter, 26 years old, a business consultant at a small firm, was an intelligent, witty, and slightly mischievous woman. If someone met her for the first time, they would think she was a cheerful, rebellious spirit who never let anything weigh her down. But the truth was far from that. Her life was nothing like what outsiders imagine. A complicated family, a mother lost early, a father who remarried an ambitious stepmother. Her mother, the most gentle and warm-hearted woman Eleanor had ever known, passed away when she was just 10 years old. From that moment on, her world turned cold. Henry Carter, her father, a successful businessman always engrossed in his work, seemed to have no time left for his only daughter. 3 years after her mother's death, he remarried Vivian Carter, a sharp-witted and ambitious woman. Eleanor still remembered the first time she saw her in their house, the cold brown eyes and the deceptively gentle smile. She was only 13 then, but she quickly realized one thing. Vivian never cared for her. Vivian never physically hurt or shouted at her, but her sharp words were more cutting than any blow. With just a few sentences, she made Eleanor feel like an outsider in her own home. You should go out with your friends more instead of hanging around the house all the time. Henry's busy after all. You shouldn't bother him. Eleanor, that dress is far too cheap for a Carter heiress. But then again, who cares? It's not like anyone notices you anyway. She soon realized that her father was no longer her refuge. Henry Carter was rarely home, and whenever he was, he silently obeyed Vivian, indifferent to everything around him. Eleanor once tried to pull him back to her side, but she eventually understood. Her father would never stand up for her. Eleanor wasn't naive. She knew Vivian despised her not because of anything she had done, but simply because she existed. Vivian wanted a picture-perfect family, a successful husband, and a luxurious home. But Eleanor was the one piece that didn't fit in. Despite her stepmother's coldness, Eleanor never allowed herself to become a victim. She learned to resist in her own way. If Vivian criticized her for wearing outdated dresses, she would deliberately choose something even more eccentric. If Vivian hated her presence at the dinner table, she would smile brightly and talk even more than usual. But no matter how much she pretended to be strong, she couldn't deny the loneliness that engulfed her within her own home, a family in crisis. In recent months, the Carter family had become more chaotic than ever. Carter Industries, the empire her father built, was now on the verge of collapse. Mounting debts, disillusioned shareholders, failed business deals. It was all a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Even though she had no interest in business, Eleanor couldn't ignore the increasing arguments between her father and stepmother. Vivian was panicked, while Henry looked more exhausted than ever. Then on a particularly stormy day, Eleanor was summoned to the living room. She walked down the stairs, sensing something was terribly wrong. Vivian sat there with an icy expression, while her father looked utterly drained. "Eleanor, sit down." Vivian's voice was light, but the pressure in it was unmistakable. "What's this about?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow, making no effort to hide her irritation. "Carter Industries is in danger, and we need a solution." Vivian spoke slowly, as if explaining to a child. "You have to marry Sebastian Hayes." A chilling sensation ran down Eleanor's spine at those words. Vivian's tone was calm, but every word was as sharp as a blade slicing through her skin. The grand living room suddenly felt suffocating, as if the air had been sucked out. She blinked a few times, trying to process what she had just heard, but her mind screamed in protest. A marriage arranged like a business transaction? The name Sebastian Hayes made Eleanor's blood run cold. Sebastian Hayes, a young billionaire, CEO of Hayes Corporation, one of the most powerful men in the city. He wasn't just known for his immense wealth, but also for his frighteningly cold demeanor. People said he didn't believe in love, only in power and profit. He wanted this marriage for the sake of his perfect public image. No way. Eleanor shot up from her seat, hands clenched, eyes blazing as she glared at Vivian. "I'm not your puppet. I won't marry anyone for a business deal." Vivian chuckled, a mocking smirk playing on her lips. Eleanor, don't act like you have a choice. Carter Industries is on the brink of bankruptcy. Without Sebastian Hayes, your father will lose everything. Eleanor turned sharply to her father, Henry Carter, the man she once respected and trusted. Dad! Her voice shook with anger. Are you really going to let them turn me into a bargaining chip? Are you really going to let them decide my life like this? Henry Carter said nothing, not a word of comfort, not a word of protest. He just sat there, head bowed, his shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of financial ruin. A sharp, bitter pain stabbed through Eleanor's heart. Her father had truly sold her out. Vivian crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly, amused. If you refuse, you know what will happen. The company will fall, your father will lose everything, and his life's work will be gone. You don't want to see him fall apart, do you? Eleanor's smirk faded. Vivian knew her weakness all too well. She was rebellious, intelligent, but deeply sentimental, and Vivian knew exactly how to exploit that. Eleanor clenched her fists, her gaze turning ice cold as she exhaled a slow breath before offering a lifeless smile. Wonderful. Not only do I have a despicable stepmother, but I also have a father willing to sell his own daughter. You can hate me as much as you want, Vivian said coolly, but the wedding will happen. Eleanor let out a quiet laugh, but her eyes darkened. Fine, I'll marry him, but don't expect me to be obedient. 3 days later, Eleanor was summoned to one of the most luxurious hotels in London. As she stepped into the VIP suite on the top floor, a chilling sensation ran down her spine. Seated on a sleek black leather sofa, exuding an aura of absolute authority, was the man she was being forced to marry, Sebastian Hayes. He wasn't just known as one of the wealthiest men in England. His reputation for being cold and ruthless preceded him. His face was sculpted to perfection, with sharp jawlines and icy gray eyes that resembled the frozen tundras of the north. He wore a flawlessly tailored suit, no wrinkles, no imperfections, just like the man himself. Eleanor smirked, breaking the tension in the room. Good evening, Mr. Hayes. I'm Eleanor Carter, also known as your reluctant bride. Sebastian didn't respond. He simply stared at her, his piercing gaze assessing her as if trying to unravel her completely. I don't care who you are, he said, his deep voice devoid of any warmth. This is just a business transaction. We sign the contract, live together for a year, and then divorce. I have no time for childish games. Eleanor arched an eyebrow, feeling a weight settle in her chest. Just as she had expected, he was nothing more than an emotionless machine. Sebastian slid a thick stack of documents toward her. Read through it. If you agree, sign at the bottom. She flipped through the pages, scanning the clauses. Marriage contract terms. No interference in each other's personal lives. No emotional involvement. No public embarrassment. The contract lasts 5 years, after which divorce is an option. Eleanor let out a dry laugh. Do you seriously think emotions can be controlled by a contract? Sebastian remained impassive, his gaze unwavering. I don't need to control them, because I will never love you. Eleanor clutched her chest in mock pain. Oh no, my poor heart, shattered to pieces. Sebastian didn't react, his expression as unreadable as ever. Eleanor shrugged, picking up the pen and signing her name with deliberate nonchalance. All right, Mr. Hayes, I'll play your little game. The wedding took place at an opulent hotel, attended by hundreds of journalists and esteemed guests. Eleanor wore a pristine white gown, but she felt nothing. Sebastian stood beside her, a cold and lifeless figure merely fulfilling his duty. When the priest asked, Sebastian Hayes, do you take Eleanor Carter as your wife? He didn't blink, his voice void of emotion. I do. Eleanor raised an eyebrow at him before playfully adding, Oh, well, I suppose I do too. Sebastian shot her a warning glance but said nothing. The wedding night, a game begins. The door to Sebastian's penthouse shut behind Eleanor, cutting off the flashing lights of the paparazzi outside. The luxurious space was vast and impeccably designed, but it felt eerily cold, lifeless, much like the man she had just married. Sebastian stood by the bar, loosening his tie and undoing the top buttons of his dress shirt with mechanical precision. The soft lighting cast sharp shadows across his chiseled features, But Eleanor barely spared him a glance. Instead, she spun slowly in place, taking in her new home. No roses, no champagne, no candlelit romance, only a sleek, monochrome emptiness, perfectly mirroring Sebastian Hayes. Eleanor scoffed lightly before turning toward him, arms crossed. Well, Mr. Hayes, this is our wedding night. Don't you think you should at least pretend to treat your wife properly? Sebastian barely looked up, his movements never faltering. What exactly are you expecting? His voice was low, sharp like the edge of a blade. Eleanor blinked, feigning innocence. Oh, nothing extravagant. Maybe some wine? A pleasant conversation? Or perhaps just a little affection? Sebastian let out a dry chuckle, void of humor. You're wasting both of our time. He placed his whiskey glass down and took a step toward her, his presence towering, imposing. We both know this isn't a real marriage. There's no need to pretend. Eleanor tilted her head back and laughed, light and teasing, yet laced with something sharper. Are you always like this? Cold, rigid, completely devoid of any fun? Sebastian didn't answer. He merely removed his watch, placing it neatly on the bar. His indifference irked her. This was their wedding night, yet he was treating it as nothing more than a business transaction. No emotion, no effort. It was as if she didn't exist. And that Eleanor could not tolerate. She narrowed her eyes. Tell me something, Mr. Hayes. Do you even know what a wedding night is supposed to be? Sebastian slid his hands into his pockets, his gaze unreadable. I don't care. Eleanor smirked. Then without warning, she stepped forward, plucking his discarded tie from the counter. Twisting it around her fingers playfully, she watched him with mock curiosity. Really? I would have thought a man as wealthy as you would at least be curious about the woman he just married. Sebastian didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on her, cold and calculating. I have no interest in you. Eleanor's smirk widened. Then I suppose I'll have to make you interested. And with that, she looped the tie around his neck and gave it a gentle tug, closing the distance between them in an instant. Sebastian stilled. His stormy gray eyes darkened, a flicker of something dangerous flashing within them. Eleanor looked up at him, her expression fearless, challenging. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, have you actually read the contract? Sebastian clenched his jaw but didn't pull away. Every word. Good. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping to a soft yet daring whisper. Then you must remember the very first clause. His muscles tensed, and for the first time that evening, his composure cracked, just slightly. We don't interfere in each other's private lives. Sebastian's lips pressed into a thin line, but his silence was telling. His patience was wearing thin. You're testing me, he murmured, his voice lower, more dangerous. Eleanor simply let the tie slip from her fingers, stepping back with a playful twinkle in her eyes. And am I succeeding? Sebastian didn't answer immediately. This was new. No one dared to toy with him the way she did. No one invaded his space without being instantly pushed away. But she wasn't afraid. She was amused, as if he was the game. And that unsettled him. Eleanor sighed theatrically before climbing onto his bed, stretching out as if she owned it. Fine, I'll let you be. She yawned, utterly at ease in his territory. Sebastian watched her for a long moment before finally turning toward the guest bedroom. I'll be sleeping in the next room. Eleanor propped herself up on her elbow, grinning. Good night, darling. Sebastian paused for half a second, then continued walking without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Eleanor alone. She closed her eyes, but her smile remained. Because tonight, she had made Sebastian Hayes notice her. And this was just the beginning. Welcome back to today's story. Before we begin, how did you like the last story on our channel? Let me know in the comments. I truly appreciate all of you for always supporting and sharing your thoughts. Your kind words are my biggest motivation. Negative feedback does make me a bit sad, but it also pushes me to improve and bring you even better stories. Some of you asked why there was no new story yesterday. As a mother of 3, I had to take care of my little son who was sick. I hope you understand. Thank you for being here. Wishing you good health and happiness. Now let's enjoy today's story. Eleanor was not the kind of woman who would settle for a dull, predictable life, especially not when she had been forced into a loveless marriage with a man like Sebastian Hayes. If I can't change my fate, then at the very least, I'll make this game interesting. Sebastian Hayes, you married the wrong woman. If Sebastian refused to play, then she would make sure he had no choice but to join in. And the game officially began that very night. The second night after the wedding, Sebastian had just finished his shower, dressed in a simple black sleepwear set, ready to turn in for the night. But when he walked toward his bed, he stopped abruptly. Eleanor was already lying there, not in her own room, but in his bed. Sebastian's sharp gaze darkened as he took in the sight before him. "What are you doing in my bed?" Eleanor propped her chin up on her hand, blinking at him innocently. "I'm not violating the contract, am I? There's no clause saying I can't sleep here." Sebastian clenched his jaw, his expression turning icy. "Get out of my bed." "No," Eleanor smiled. She didn't budge. Instead, she turned to her side, resting her head on her hand, and started staring at him. Sebastian immediately felt irritation creeping in. "What are you looking at?" "Just trying to figure out if you're actually human or if you're just a robot programmed to make money and control everything." Sebastian exhaled slowly, clearly restraining himself. "You're testing my patience." Eleanor simply grinned and continued staring. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Sebastian finally lost his patience. He stepped forward, yanked the blanket around her, lifted her up, and dumped her onto the bed next door. "Sleep in your own room." Eleanor chuckled but obediently lay down. "You're never going to last a whole year with me, Sebastian Hayes." Sebastian slammed the door behind him, but a strange feeling settled in his chest, one he couldn't quite shake off. The next night, Eleanor decided to raise the stakes. This time, instead of simply lying in Sebastian's bed, she did something even more outrageous. She brought an oversized bag of popcorn and set up a movie on her iPad, right in the middle of his bed. When Sebastian walked into the room, he froze. Before him, Eleanor was wrapped up in a blanket, dressed in a white bunny pajama set, complete with long, floppy ears, looking completely at home. "What the hell are you doing?" Sebastian gritted out. Eleanor popped a piece of popcorn into her mouth, chewing leisurely. "Watching a movie. Want to join? It has a classic romantic scene. I think we could learn something from it." Sebastian felt his blood pressure spike. "Eleanor, you are not allowed to eat in my bed." "Oh?" She raised an eyebrow, tossing another piece of popcorn into her mouth with a deliberately defiant look. "Pretty sure our contract doesn't mention that?" Sebastian's hands clenched at his sides, his sharp gaze darkening. "Get outside office my bed now. If you want me out, then do it yourself." Eleanor grinned mischievously. Sebastian let out a sharp exhale, stepped forward, snatched the bag of popcorn from her hands and tossed it aside. But Eleanor didn't look the least bit fazed. Instead, she burst out laughing. "Mr. Hayes, you're way too easy to provoke." Sebastian narrowed his eyes at her, then turned and walked out, deciding she wasn't worth the argument. Eleanor smirked to herself. This was going to be fun. The morning after. When Sebastian stepped out of his study the next morning, he stopped abruptly. Eleanor was strolling around the vast penthouse, casually sipping a cup of coffee, wearing one of his white dress shirts. She had only buttoned a few of them, revealing her long, slender legs, her expression completely nonchalant. Sebastian felt a surge of irritation rise instantly. "What are you wearing?" Eleanor shrugged, raising the coffee cup to her lips. "Your shirt. Don't worry, I picked the least expensive one from your closet." Sebastian took a slow, dangerous step toward her. "You are not allowed to touch my things." "Oh? And what are you going to do about it?" Eleanor tilted her head, smirking mischievously. Sebastian stiffened. She was right. Nowhere in the contract did it say she couldn't wear his clothes. Frustrated, he turned away, but his gaze involuntarily flickered back to her figure, drowning in the oversized shirt. There was something dangerous about this woman. Eleanor smirked as she watched Sebastian try to keep his composure. She knew she had won another round. That night, Eleanor curled up in bed, clutching her stomach, her face pale as she bit her lip to stifle her pain. She knew she had been reckless. Too much coffee, too many snacks, and the stress of this forced marriage had finally caught up with her. Her stomach protested fiercely. At first, she thought the pain would pass, but it only worsened. She shifted, trying to get up and find some warm water, but the moment her feet touched the floor, a wave of dizziness crashed over her. She swayed, the room spinning, and then, crash! A loud thud echoed as Eleanor collapsed onto the floor, knocking over a glass from her bedside table. Within seconds, her bedroom door swung open. Sebastian stood at the threshold, his brows furrowed deeply as he took in the sight before him. Eleanor hunched over on the floor, clutching her stomach, her expression twisted in pain. Eleanor, his voice dropped an octave, laced with a concern he didn't even realize was there. Eleanor forced a weak smile. Don't worry, it's just a stomachache. But the moment she tried to stand, a sharp wave of pain seized her, making her shudder, her breathing ragged. Sebastian was by her side in an instant. One hand grasped her arm, the other sliding behind her back, steadying her effortlessly. For a moment he hesitated, the realization of how small she felt in his arms hitting him unexpectedly. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. Sit down, stop moving. Eleanor had no strength left to argue. She let him guide her back onto the bed. The next second, Sebastian pulled out his phone and called his private doctor. 15 minutes later, the doctor arrived swiftly. Eleanor's eyes remained half-lidded, her breathing shallow, but she could still hear Sebastian's deep voice beside her. Check her now. She's in serious pain. The doctor examined her carefully, then prescribed medication and strict instructions. She has gastritis, triggered by stress and poor eating habits. Make sure she rests, takes her medicine on time, and avoids additional stress. Sebastian nodded, but his gaze never left Eleanor. Stress, he thought, frowning. This woman was constantly smirking, teasing him, playing games. Since when was she stressed? Once the doctor left, Sebastian sat on the edge of the bed. Without a word, he reached forward and pulled the blanket up to cover her. Eleanor stirred slightly, her heavy eyelids barely lifting as she looked at him. Are you worried about me? Her voice was weak but still laced with mischief. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. He simply held her gaze for a long moment before murmuring, Go to sleep. Eleanor smiled faintly, this time without mockery. Sebastian Hayes, maybe you're not as cold as I thought. Something changed that night. From that night on, Sebastian realized something strange. He could no longer ignore Eleanor. Every time he passed the living room and saw her sprawled on the couch, a book in her hands but her eyes secretly watching him, something stirred inside him. Every time she brushed past him in the kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, his gaze lingered a second too long. Eleanor wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She didn't fear him. She didn't try to please him. She didn't even care what he thought. Instead, she challenged him. And that unsettled him, the unpredictable variable. Eleanor made him feel something he had never experienced before. Sebastian Hayes had always controlled everything. His work, his wealth, his relationships, even his own emotions. But with Eleanor, everything was chaotic. She didn't act the way he expected. She didn't care about his approval. She didn't follow any of his rules. She was an unpredictable variable, a puzzle without an answer. And Sebastian hated things he couldn't control. But instead of wanting to push her away, for the first time he wanted to understand her. Of course, Eleanor wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. She had noticed the subtle shift in the way Sebastian looked at her, and she decided it was time to take the game to the next level. One morning, while Sebastian was seated in his chair, deeply engrossed in reviewing an important contract, Eleanor suddenly stepped forward, placing her hands on the desk, staring straight at him. Sebastian lifted his gaze, his expression indifferent. What do you want now? Eleanor shrugged, flashing a cryptic smile. Nothing. Just that. I've noticed you've been looking at me more than usual lately. Sebastian hesitated for a fraction of a second before regaining his composure. You're imagining things? Really? Eleanor batted her lashes, deliberately leaning in a little closer, her tone teasing. Sebastian met her playful gaze. and for the first time in a long time, he felt breathless. Eleanor chuckled softly before straightening up. "Don't worry, I won't break the contract, Mr. Hayes." Sebastian watched her walk away, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could stick to his own rules. The marriage that wasn't supposed to be this complicated. Sebastian Hayes never thought marriage could be this much of a nuisance. He had believed the contract was clear. No interference in each other's personal lives. No disruptions. No emotions. But apparently Eleanor Carter had never considered the contract binding, because every day he had to deal with her antics, mischievous, unpredictable, constantly testing his patience. And worse, he could do nothing to stop her. 3 a.m. madness. One night at exactly 3 a.m., Sebastian's alarm blared unexpectedly. He frowned, reaching out to turn it off, only to hear a voice right beside him. "Sebastian?" He furrowed his brows but kept his eyes closed. "Sebastian?" The voice was closer now. And then, "What do you think about marriage?" Sebastian's eyes snapped open. Eleanor was sitting cross-legged on the bed, looking at him with a dead serious expression. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was hoarse from sleep. "What do you think about marriage?" Eleanor repeated, completely alert. Sebastian clenched his jaw, his face darkening. "You woke me up at 3 in the morning just to ask that?" Eleanor nodded, entirely unfazed, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Sebastian inhaled deeply, trying to suppress the rage simmering beneath his exhaustion. "Do you have any idea how important my meeting is tomorrow morning?" "Of course." "Then why the hell are you doing this?" Eleanor blinked, then tilted her head with a sly smile. "Because I wanted to see you lose your temper." Sebastian froze for a second before pulling the blanket over his head. "Turn off the lights. Go to sleep." Eleanor shrugged and whispered as she slid off the bed. "No fun at all." Sebastian shut his eyes, but for some reason, sleep didn't come as easily as before. Sebastian was changing. Sebastian tried to ignore Eleanor, but with each passing day it became more impossible. No matter where he went or what he did, she was always on his mind. When she wasn't around, the house felt uncomfortably quiet. When she was, he couldn't stop looking at her. And despite constantly reminding himself that this was just a contract marriage, he couldn't deny it anymore. Eleanor had broken every rule in his life. The night he stepped in. One evening, Eleanor ran into trouble at work. Sebastian overheard her on the phone, her voice tense but composed, clearly arguing with someone. For some reason, the frustration in her tone unsettled him. And before he even realized it, he spoke. "Who's giving you trouble?" Eleanor froze, turning to look at him. Sebastian's face remained unreadable, but his eyes darkened. "I asked, who is giving you trouble?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes before letting out a soft chuckle. "Mr. Hayes, are you worried about me?" Sebastian didn't answer. Instead, he simply picked up his phone. "Send me their details." And within an hour, Eleanor's problem vanished without a trace. She looked at him differently that night. Maybe Dash. Just maybe. Sebastian Hayes wasn't as cold as she thought. The worst nightmare came true. Eleanor never thought her worst nightmare would come true on a gray, rainy day like this. She received the news of her father's death through a call from the hospital. At that moment, she was at her office, flipping through a stack of documents when her phone suddenly vibrated. She picked up, her tone calm as always. "Hello?" But the voice on the other end wasn't her father's, nor was it the familiar, calculating voice of her stepmother. Instead, it was a stranger's voice, cold, distant, tinged with sympathy. "Is this Eleanor Carter?" "Yes, speaking." "We regret to inform you that your father, Mr. Henry Carter, passed away this morning due to a sudden heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital but did not survive." Eleanor froze, her eyes widening. The words hit her like a hammer, each syllable ringing in her head, making it impossible to breathe. "No, that's not possible." "I'm very sorry." The phone slipped from her fingers, landing on the desk with a soft thud. At that moment, her world collapsed. Her father was dead. The man who, despite never truly caring for her, was still her only family in this world, was gone. A deep emptiness, an unspeakable loss, and a pain beyond words consumed her. She had lost everything. 3 days after her father's passing, the funeral was held in a heavy atmosphere of sorrow. Eleanor stood in silence, dressed in a black gown, watching as Henry Carter's coffin was slowly lowered into the ground. The drizzle fell, soaking through her clothes and clinging to her skin, yet she felt nothing. Sebastian stood beside her, his presence steady yet unreadable, offering silent support without a word. Across the cemetery, Vivian Carter stood at a distance, her expression carefully composed. A perfect mask of grief meant for the cameras and the public eye. But Eleanor didn't care. All she could feel was the deep, suffocating hollowness settling in her chest. Her father had never truly been there for her, had let her grow up in cold indifference, always choosing his work, his new family, over his only daughter. Yet despite it all, he had still been her father. And now he was gone. With his death, she had lost the last thread of connection she had to a family. No one to protect her. No one who needed her. She was utterly alone. When the funeral ended, Eleanor returned to the penthouse in a daze. She didn't bother removing her coat, nor did she acknowledge Sebastian's presence. Instead, she walked straight to the living room, her empty gaze fixed ahead as though staring into nothingness. She sank onto the sofa, curling into herself, arms wrapped around her own body, as if trying to hold on to a warmth that no longer existed. But she didn't cry. Not a single tear fell. Instead, she sat in silence, an eerie, suffocating stillness that felt heavier than any sobs could have. Sebastian lingered by the doorway, watching her from afar. The mischievous, defiant Eleanor he had come to know was nowhere to be found. In her place was someone else, someone broken, drowning in a grief so profound that it seemed to consume the very air around her. No teasing remarks, no playful smirks, no fire in her eyes. Just Eleanor Carter, lost in the depths of her own sorrow. Something inside him shifted, a strange discomfort, a foreign unease, a sharp pang in his chest that he couldn't ignore. He wanted to step forward, to say something, anything, but the words never came. Sebastian Hayes had never comforted anyone before. He had never needed to. And now, faced with Eleanor's pain, he found himself utterly powerless. Are you still following the story? Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an emotional story like this. 3 days later, Vivian Carter reveals her true face. Eleanor had long grown accustomed to her stepmother's deceitful mask. But today, Vivian Carter looked different. She no longer wore the face of a grieving widow. Instead, she stood before Eleanor as a ruthless businesswoman with cold, calculating eyes. Henry is gone, Eleanor. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Eleanor clenched her fists. What do you want? Vivian smirked, her gaze sharp as a blade. The company, as of today, Carter Industries belongs to me. Eleanor wasn't surprised, but the rage burning inside her ignited like wildfire. The company was my father's. You have no right. Vivian sighed, her expression one of mock pity. Oh, Eleanor, did you really think Henry left you anything? He signed the inheritance transfer long before he died. I control everything now. Eleanor staggered back, her body turning cold. That's impossible. See for yourself. Vivian pulled out a stack of legal documents and placed them on the desk. With trembling hands, Eleanor picked them up, her eyes scanning the words desperately. And then, she saw her father's signature at the bottom of the page. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. The company her father had spent his entire life building was now in Vivian's hands. The final blow. Eleanor stood there, frozen, her mind completely blank. But the shock wasn't over yet. Vivian delivered another, even crueler blow. If you behave, I might let you keep a symbolic share. Her voice was sweet, fake sympathy dripping from every word, as if she were granting Eleanor a favor. Eleanor bit down hard on her lip, anger and hatred bubbling inside her. I won't let you do this. Oh? Vivian raised an eyebrow, her smirk deepening. And who do you think will help you? Sebastian? Eleanor's heart stopped. What do you mean? Vivian remained calm, leisurely pulling out another document before sliding it across the desk. Sebastian and I have already discussed things. If he agrees to collaborate with me, Hayes Corporation will receive a large stake in Carter Industries. It's a mutually beneficial deal. The floor beneath Eleanor seemed to vanish. She stared at the document in front of her breath catching in her throat. No. Sebastian, had he betrayed her? Confrontation. The moment Eleanor left Vivian's office, she went straight to find Sebastian. She found him standing on the penthouse balcony, gazing at the city skyline, lost in thought. But the moment he saw her, he knew something was wrong. Eleanor, what? You did it, didn't you? Her voice shook. Sebastian frowned but didn't deny it immediately. And that hesitation felt like a knife stabbing straight into Eleanor's heart. You really made a deal with her? It's not what you think. Then what is it? Just another business transaction? Eleanor let out a bitter laugh, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Sebastian's jaw tightened. After a long pause, he exhaled deeply. I don't care about the company, I care about you. Eleanor froze. For the first time, Sebastian looked at her with complete sincerity. I don't know when it happened, but Eleanor, you've changed my life. Eleanor's heart sank. She wanted to believe him, but the pain inside her was too much. I can't trust you anymore. She turned away, walking off as Sebastian called after her. A part of her wanted to run into his arms, but her rationality held her back. She had lost too much. She couldn't afford to fall again. After everything, Eleanor had lost it all. Her father was gone. Her company had been stolen. And the one person she thought she could trust, Sebastian, seemed to have betrayed her too. That night she cried. She sat curled up on the darkened sofa, staring blankly out the window. She didn't know what to do next, but deep inside her a fire was beginning to burn. She couldn't let Vivian Carter take her father's company so easily. She had to fight. A battle she had to fight alone. Or so she thought. The next morning, Eleanor left the penthouse and began her battle to reclaim the company. But she quickly realized a bitter truth. Vivian had planned everything too well. She held the majority of the shares. She controlled the board of directors. She had even secured the inheritance contract in her favor. Eleanor had nothing except a small, insignificant stake. She was completely alone in this fight. Or at least that's what she thought, an unexpected offer. That evening, exhausted and frustrated, Eleanor returned to the penthouse. But when she stepped inside, she found Sebastian sitting in the living room, waiting for her. She stopped at the door, her guard immediately up. What do you want? Her voice was cold. Sebastian slowly stood up, his storm gray eyes locking onto hers. To help you take back the company? Eleanor stared at him, stunned. You're joking. You're working with Vivian. Sebastian sighed, his patience evident in his expression. I was never on her side. I only pretended to cooperate to find a way to take back control. Eleanor's fist clenched, uncertainty filling her heart. Why should I believe you? Sebastian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Because I can't watch you be destroyed. Eleanor froze. For the first time, her heart skipped a beat, but she hadn't forgotten the pain he had caused her. If I agree to work with you, I make the rules. Sebastian simply shrugged, his expression unreadable. That's fine. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, searching for any deception. Then she nodded. Good. Then let's take down Vivian Carter. The plan to take back Carter Industries. For the next week, they worked tirelessly. Step 1, uncover the truth. Sebastian used his connections to hire the best lawyers to re-examine Henry Carter's inheritance contract. As they suspected, there were signs of forgery. Step 2, divide and conquer. Eleanor secretly met with the company's shareholders, pointing out Vivian's questionable management decisions. Slowly, support for Vivian began to weaken. Step 3, the final blow. They would expose everything at the next board meeting, the day of reckoning. The boardroom was filled with executives and investors, tension thick in the air. Eleanor walked in with icy confidence, stronger than she had ever been. Vivian sat at the head of the table, smug and self-assured, but when she saw Eleanor, her smile faltered. Sebastian took a seat beside Eleanor, his sharp gaze warning anyone who dared to stand in their way. The meeting began, and as expected, Vivian tried to reaffirm her control. But this time, Eleanor was ready. She calmly presented evidence proving that Vivian had forged the inheritance documents. The room exploded with chaos. The board members began whispering anxiously, questioning the legitimacy of Vivian's leadership. Then Sebastian stepped in, presenting additional documents that revealed Vivian's financial manipulation and cover-ups. By the end of the meeting, the board of directors voted. Vivian Carter was immediately removed as CEO, and Eleanor reclaimed her father's company. The end of Vivian Carter. As the meeting adjourned, Vivian's face turned deathly pale. She had lost. She turned to Eleanor, pure hatred in her eyes. But Eleanor merely looked at her, her voice calm and unwavering. "You took too much from me. Now it's time for you to pay the price." With no power left, Vivian had no choice but to walk away, and Eleanor Carter had officially won the battle. A night of unspoken truths. Eleanor stood on the balcony that night, the cold night breeze weaving through her hair, ruffling the soft fabric of her dress. Below her, the city pulsed with life. Bright lights, bustling streets, as if it had never known pain or loss. She tilted her head toward the sky, feeling both relief and emptiness. She had reclaimed her company. She had made Vivian pay, but the ache in her heart hadn't lessened. A quiet step sounded behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Sebastian. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her, silent yet steady. Eleanor inhaled deeply before finally speaking, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you." Sebastian glanced at her, his gray eyes unreadable under the dim balcony light. "For what?" "For helping me take back the company. I don't know how to repay you." She turned to look at him then, her clear eyes carrying a shadow of sorrow. Sebastian didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Then he spoke, his deep voice carrying something different this time. "You don't need to thank me. I was just doing my duty as your husband." Eleanor stiffened, her eyes widening slightly. But within a heartbeat, she masked her emotions, slipping back into her usual composure. She turned away, her expression retreating into the same quiet sadness as before. Sebastian didn't like that. He wanted to see her smirk mischievously. He wanted to see her eyes gleam with mischief. He let out a slow sigh, his voice gentler this time. "I want you to be the way you were. Wild, troublesome." Eleanor's lips twitched in amusement, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned against the railing, watching the world below. And then, after a long pause, she spoke, a confession she had never shared with anyone before. "You know, I once had a happy family." Sebastian remained quiet, listening. Eleanor narrowed her eyes slightly as if trying to recall a distant memory. "My mother was the most wonderful woman. She always smiled, always held me close, always told me I was her little princess." Her voice softened. "But then she left too soon, and I was left alone in that cold house." Sebastian's gaze darkened slightly. Eleanor chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. "And my father, he loved his work more than he ever loved me. He was still my father, but I always felt like I was just a shadow in his life. And then my stepmother arrived, and I knew I no longer had a place in his heart." She turned her head slightly, her eyes shimmering. Not with tears, but with something far more painful. "But I refused to be sad. If I had to live, why choose a dull existence? Even in grief, I chose to be happy, to love life." Finally, she turned to him, offering him a small, knowing smile. "If I can't change my losses, at least I can control how I embrace them." Sebastian said nothing, but inside him a storm raged. For the first time, he truly understood Eleanor. She wasn't just a carefree, playful troublemaker. She was someone who had endured loss, yet still chose to live fiercely. She had suffered deeply, but still smiled. Even when the world turned its back on her, she stood tall. The one thing he couldn't control. Sebastian took a deep breath, watching the woman before him. She had lived through so much pain. She had lost so much, but she still lit up the world in a way no one else could. She was a storm, a force of nature. And he, a man who had always controlled everything, was utterly powerless against her. She had shown him a world he had never known, a world of freedom, laughter, chaos. He had always been the one in control, but she was the only person who made him lose it. And now when she was at her lowest, when the fire inside her seemed to dim, he didn't want to just watch. He wanted to hold her, to protect her, to take away her pain. But he didn't know how to say any of that. So he did the only thing he could. He gently pulled her into his arms, an unspoken understanding. Eleanor didn't resist. She froze for a moment, startled. But then she let herself sink into his warmth. She closed her eyes, letting herself feel something she hadn't realized she needed. His warmth. Sebastian tightened his hold, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to be strong all the time." Eleanor didn't reply. She simply nodded. And in that moment, though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew something had changed. No longer just a contract marriage, no longer strangers forced together, but two souls slowly finding their way to each other, even if neither of them was ready to admit it yet. No more contracts, only love. Eleanor walked into the living room, still holding her cup of steaming coffee. She sank onto the sofa, stretching her legs over the table, enjoying a rare, peaceful evening after all the chaos. But peace never lasted long with Sebastian Hayes around. He stood in front of her, his expression serious. Too serious. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "What now, Mr. Hayes?" Sebastian didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. Eleanor glanced at them and immediately recognized the marriage contract. She blinked, intrigued. "Don't tell me you're revising the contract again, adding a no popcorn in bed clause?" Sebastian said nothing. Instead, he reached into his other pocket, pulled out a lighter, and calmly flicked it on. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. "Wait!" Before she could react, the flames licked the edges of the contract, consuming the paper until it crumbled into ashes in his hands. Eleanor's jaw dropped. "What the hell did you just do?" Sebastian tossed the remaining ashes into the trash, dusting off his hands. Then in a deep, steady voice, he said, "I don't want a marriage with conditions anymore." Eleanor stared at him, lips slightly parted in shock. "Then, what do you want?" Sebastian held her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he pulled out a small velvet box. Eleanor's heart pounded. She knew exactly what this meant. But instead of tearing up like a typical romantic heroine, she folded her arms, tilted her head, and smirked. "Let me guess. You planned this whole dramatic moment, didn't you? You thought burning the contract would make me cry and jump into your arms?" Sebastian arched an eyebrow, but the corner of his lips twitched, amused. He knelt in front of her, flipping open the ring box. "Eleanor Carter." His voice was deep, steady but soft in a way she had never heard before. "The first time I married you, it was because of a contract." Eleanor chuckled, but this time it wasn't sarcastic. "And this time," Sebastian didn't hesitate. "This time I'm marrying you because I can't live without you." For the first time, Eleanor was speechless. No jokes, no teasing, just her and him, the man who had stood by her side through everything. She looked at the ring, then back at his eyes, and suddenly, she realized, at some point her heart had already belonged to him. She shrugged, pretending to hesitate. Tough decision. You are ridiculously serious after all." Sebastian simply waited. Eleanor let out a soft laugh, then suddenly snatched the ring box from his hands. "All right, I'll accept you, Mr. Hayes." Sebastian chuckled, but just as he reached for her hand to slip the ring on, Eleanor stepped back. "Wait, I have one condition." Sebastian sighed, suspicious. "What is it now?" Eleanor batted her lashes, grinning mischievously. "If I agree to marry you, I get unlimited rights to cause chaos, and you're not allowed to complain." Sebastian exhaled, defeated, but he still took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. His voice was low, warm, and undeniably affectionate. Fine, but you should know. Now that you're officially my wife, I'm never letting you go. Eleanor laughed, her eyes dancing with mischief. Who said you'd never fall for me? Sebastian smirked, then pulled her into a deep kiss. 3 months later, a wedding without contracts, no more conditions, no more negotiations. This time, Eleanor Carter and Sebastian Hayes married for love. The wedding took place in a stunning garden, adorned with white roses and soft golden sunlight. Eleanor wore a simple yet elegant wedding dress, her face radiant with happiness. At the end of the aisle stood Sebastian, no longer the cold-hearted businessman. He wasn't waiting for her as part of a deal. He was waiting for the love of his life. When the priest asked, "Sebastian Hayes, do you take Eleanor Carter as your wife, to love and cherish for all your days?" Sebastian's voice was unwavering. "I do." Then the priest turned to Eleanor. She looked straight at Sebastian, smiling. "I do." Just as the priest was about to pronounce them husband and wife, Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "So, this means you can't stop me from causing trouble anymore, right?" Sebastian narrowed his eyes. Before he could respond, she planted a loud, playful kiss on his cheek. The crowd burst into laughter. Sebastian sighed, but there was nothing but love in his gaze. "As long as you stay by my side, you can cause as much chaos as you want." Then finally, they sealed their vows with a real kiss, surrounded by their closest loved ones. A new beginning built on love. No contracts, no conditions, just them. Sometimes we don't get to choose how life unfolds, but we can choose how we face it. Eleanor had lost her mother. She had been abandoned by her father, but she never let those losses define her. She chose to live fiercely, to fight for what she deserved. Love isn't built on contracts or agreements. It's built on understanding, patience, and the willingness to change for one another. Sebastian had once believed control was everything, but when he fell in love, he realized the most important thing wasn't control, it was protecting and cherishing the woman he loved. Thank you for following this story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed Eleanor and Sebastian's journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. See you in the next story.